The views and opinions expressed in this podcast by the host and or the guest do not necessarily reflect the views of the host and or Paranormal Buzz Radio and or its sponsors. Use of any material produced by Paranormal Buzz Radio without express written consent is prohibited. Paranormal Buzz Radio will not be held responsible for you holding your knees, crying, and rocking in a corner in a puddle of your own urine, or being beheaded by a group of children in a cornfield. In fact, if you come across a group of children in a cornfield, we promise to make fun of you as you run away screaming in terror. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello everyone, welcome to Demon Folklorist. Yep, I am the Demon Folklorist, Victoria J, and today we're going to be talking about leprechauns, both in folklore and in horror movies. So, this is because I love all holidays. I feel like when you're a folklorist, you kind of have to. And I haven't done a horror episode in a minute. So, here is the Warwick Davis Leprechaun series, because is it really a Leprechaun movie if Warwick Davis isn't in it? No, not in my opinion. Also today, we have a little guest with us. Salem's little sister, Lily, is here. If you could hear her, that was her making some noise a little earlier. She's staying with us for a second. So, say hi, Lily. I watched all of the Leprechaun movies that had Warwick Davis in it, so you didn't have to. This is basically going to be a stream of consciousness commentary of this series, so best to leave now if you're not into that sort of thing. First, let's talk about leprechauns in general. Leprechauns originate from Ireland and are said to be male fairies that specifically make shoes and guard gold. They are very tricksy and really difficult to catch, but if they are caught, sometimes they grant wishes. And then we have this four-leaf clover thing being his weakness, right? Bullets can slow him down until he regenerates and he can move things with his mind. He can also teleport. And his limbs can move independent of his body, though this hurts. He can regenerate, he's immensely strong, and he bleeds green. I want you to remember this because, unfortunately, except for the four-leaf clovers, basically nothing else is the same across the movies. You could tell they got a different producer, different writers every single movie. And that happens with a lot of sequels. It's just that I found that the older sequels seem to have this problem of not being able to be consistent with their story. Some sequels are written better than others, though. At the end of the rainbow, it leads you to the gold. That lore is definitely used, and I really loved that piece of St. Patrick's Day lore as a kid because it's so fun to think about. Nobody can actually reach the end of a rainbow, right? But you're gonna try. As a kid, at least. Here are some of the kills from this movie. We have a broken neck, heart attack, a shop owner was pogoed to death. He breaks a cop's neck. He can make vehicles out of things. It's all very strange. Jennifer Aniston is in this one. She's Tori. She's a spoiled city girl banished to North Dakota for the summer, who very literally bumps into is likely her romantic lead. They're from different backgrounds as usual. She only actually stays at this house to prove her romantic lead wrong. And the leprechaun is sleeping in the basement in a box that he got trapped in. And he gets out because he throws his voice to a house painter, pretending that he's a child. And the house painter moves the clover off the box containing him. I just really love that he feels the need to shine all the shoes because he's a cobbler. Did he just really miss shoes while he was in the box, or is it just a unique compulsion? Like, if we put him in a room full of shoes, will he be distracted? Like, good, they finally caught on to that idea that shoes are the way to his heart. Because a lot of the direction of this movie feels like, let's just make Warwick Davis do crazy shit. And finally, someone is thinking we should give him his stupid gold back. Also, it's going to be a problem that one of the people swallowed a piece of it because why would it be that easy, really, just to give him his gold back? No, we gotta figure that one out. In this one, he died, but didn't really die, from a catapulted four-leaf clover into his mouth, and he melted a little before falling into the well, then exploded. I actually do like this one. It's not the best of the series. And it is totally watchable, but only in this campiest of ways. But that really does make it fun. So, Leprechaun 2 came out in 1994. And the watchability of this one goes down a little bit. I gave it a 2.5 out of 5 shamrocks. I wanted to like it because they had this really interesting lore going on. Okay, so back in the before times, the leprechaun caught himself a slave during the Feast of St. Patrick. And his birthday, it happens to be on this auspicious night. So it's time for the leprechaun to pick a bride. And through sneezing, he traps her if nobody says, "God bless you." The girl that this happens to is the new slave's daughter. So naturally, the slave puts a stop to it and puts a curse on the family so that his next 1000th birthday, he'll claim his fairest offspring as bride. Naturally, there is a scroll depicting the bloodline's fairest maidens, as you do, also explaining that the family went to America. Present day. These days, you never really know, do you, what shit your family wrought on your head. So the first person we come across is a homeless man's alcohol awaking him from tree sleep portal because it spilled, though the whiskey though wasn't Irish enough. But the first act on Earth is to yank out this man's gold tooth. What would you expect of a leprechaun, really? There were a lot of gold-related injuries in this one, like a tooth and a finger. The first kill is actually through an illusion, a very weird illusion that uses gigantic fans on a man's face, and the man thought they were boobs. I don't know. Anyway, he also cut open a man who had gold inside of him. I don't even know. This one just got a little weird. And then there is some type of scrying magic that they introduced with a chalk circle and a special stick to help him find his bride. Really did like the girl that they had singled out because she was very much like not gonna take shit from men. When a guy tried to push her into an uncomfortable situation, she was like, no. And then she hits him and runs away. And I was like, absolutely. That is the right call. And she genuinely tried to brain the leprechaun. So, of course I like her. Then he traps her, right? And he puts like this ring around her neck that like keeps her there magically. And he kisses her, which is literally the stuff of nightmares because he has like a forked tongue and green slobber. It's gross. In this one, it's interesting because iron burns him. And it's also implied that he's one of the Fae. He's also super horny and weird in this one. And then I just have this question now in general, and it would take way more folklore research. But when did leprechauns become associated with genies and like this whole idea of 3 wishes? Because I do love how people shift quickly from you're crazy to okay, I guess leprechauns are real in these types of movies. Like there's just a very short period of disbelief before they're like, all right, this is a part of my reality now. But even though they brought out all this lore, the story just sort of feels like it lost its direction as it went along because it feels like they forgot what genre they were in and just went with an overarching umbrella of folklore. It's doing this in favor of its own news story, which is enjoyable, but the rest of the movie unfortunately is not that interesting. It was a good idea though to imprison him for a short time in the safe because it's iron, although this was sort of convenient to the story because seriously they never bring it up again in this entire series. Once again, we are seeing this theme of greed coming in again because if you can count on anything, it's that people are greedy as shit. They really are. And then dealing with leprechauns to me feels like it's all about loopholes. Even in the original lore, you really had to outwit them in order to get these wishes. And I wouldn't want a wish from a leprechaun because I feel like they would just twist it around until you didn't want the wish anymore. Like in Bedazzled, which was a movie from the 90s, we had Elizabeth Hurley as the devil and Brendan Fraser, love him, as a random guy, and she wants to give him, I can't remember if it was how many wishes, but each one of them was bad because, she's Satan. Like, she can't really give you anything really good. So one of them is that he wished that he was super powerful and rich and had this specific woman as his wife, and it turned out he was a Colombian drug lord and his wife was cheating on him anyway. So it's like, would you really want what a leprechaun's offering? I personally would not, but that's me. The little Leprechaun guy just can't be killed as long as he has the gold now. It has to be given, which didn't seem to be a problem in the last movie. And now iron's a problem for him, and it's all very confused in this timeline. Also, this is just a general question. Do you ever wonder if actors feel totally stupid when they say something on camera or they're being told to do something, but they know that CGI is going to be used later? That definitely occurred to me at least a couple times while I was watching this movie, that these actors just must have felt so stupid. Again, the girl is the most interesting part of the movie. And what's weird about it is, even though she's a main character, she's not really in it. Then again, I personally think that female-focused stories have always been more complex. But I'm not really impressed that she still needs to be saved, awesome as she is. And as much as she really does do her best to try and figure this one out. She's not sitting by idle while the leprechaun has her trapped in his magical cave. She's trying to get out basically the whole time, but the magic has her running in circles. There was this surprisingly enjoyable moment, and there's one of them in almost every one of these movies, when his hat gets knocked off and we see he's actually bald, and he's like, oh damn, there's just something about it that's really funny. So there's this moment where the leprechaun pretends to be Bridget, and honestly, it's not a leprechaun movie if he doesn't pretend to be a woman at least once in sort of a seductive manner. But I knew that this was illusion Bridget, which is what the girl's name is, because her hair was actually curled more and looked better. That was how I personally knew. I was just severely disappointed by this one. I think it had really good bones, but the flesh of the story just didn't make it into something truly enjoyable to watch. So that was why I gave it 2.5 shamrocks. Now, Leprechaun 3 is actually one of my favorites. I give it 4 out of 5 shamrocks, and that's pretty high. So this movie completely contradicts what happened in the last one as far as how he came back, because now there's a statue of him that, unless the medallion that looks fake is removed, he stays as a statue, right? And it's just at this point where they just sort of add a weakness for him whenever they need to. We have this overeager kid who is strangely intense. His name is Scott. So Scott is just way too impressed by a casino in Las Vegas, which is where this takes place. And this girl, Tammy, is a seemingly normal girl who's also a magician, which is a random thing to be, I guess, unless you're in Vegas. And there is a long period of time, though, where the plot just feels like it's going absolutely nowhere. Much like Vegas is kind of a nowhere in and of itself. I used to live there. So I know how the Strip can be fun, but basically nothing else is. And then there's this whole thing about, why does the medallion make the leprechaun foam green? Who knows? Also, the leprechaun doesn't hold on to that last piece of gold very well in every movie, so he might want to work on that. Anyway, Scott seems like a kid, and he does some pretty stupid things. So he has money from college that he is wanting to gamble, because naturally to him, it seems like a good idea to gamble your college money to try and make twice as much of it. That's never a good idea, but okay. Also, is he really surprised that he just bet away his school money and then lost it? He is straight up losing his mind over here, and I'm like, what did you think was going to happen? It's a gamble. Gambling almost never pays out. If they did, casinos would go bust. Don't you know that? Even if the game isn't rigged, it's still dangerous. You are such a dumbass of the highest order if you think something's really going to happen. And then he ends up pawning his grandpa's watch, and that's how he even meets the leprechaun. So the shop owner has sort of been part of this story already for too long, but he is the first kill. He got garroted by a phone line. And like the previous movie, the couple is literally only here because they cross paths later in the movie. Unfortunately, we didn't really need this much character development. And the second kill is someone gets electrocuted. Now you can actually wish on the gold if you have a shilling of it. Each of these movies, I swear, is just making it up as it goes along. It's more like an anthology than a series, because the only common denominator is Warwick Davis as the leprechaun. Otherwise, none of these movies have any relationship to each other. And I'm not going to lie to you. These movies are just a tiny bit more watchable than I thought they would be. They're a little funnier, too. There's also just like a really loose concept of personal property in this movie. Everybody basically steals the gold from each other and says it's theirs. And then there are these two like hired goons who are standing around talking about their boxers and why they prefer like briefs to boxers because they're crawling up their butts and then their socks are crawling around their ankles. What a town. The real gold here in this movie is the comedy gold. They just leaned right into it, and it's so funny. But there's also no way to tell where this movie's actually going, because it's gone already so many places. I totally laughed outright when the leprechaun was tempted to see the topless girls, and he was just like, nope, can't do that. Gotta go find the gold. Because there was something about this movie that works when it really shouldn't. And then we have this whole plot line where Scott begins to start turning into a leprechaun himself, because that's a thing. Like, leprechauns aren't related to humans at all. There's no way this would be a thing, but it's just muddying the folklore waters some more, because apparently Scott was like bitten by the leprechaun. Also, he can smell gold now, and destroying the gold destroys him. I don't know why it's tied to his life force this way, but okay. There's this whole other thing where this woman in the movie, Loretta, she ends up wishing she's 20 years younger or something. And then her punishment is specifically terrifying because she looks great. And what ends up happening to her is that the leprechaun finds her and then makes her blow up like a balloon and completely expanding into this duck monster before exploding, and it kills her. And it's just, there's something about the image that's really upsetting. We also have Fazio, who gets cut in half. He's the terrible magician, and sort of this leprechaun versus leprechaun thing with a lot of rhymes. And I just wondered what was really happening at this point. And there was a weird flight sequence of the leprechaun's body after the gold was actually set on fire. And it was just, there was so much going on. And I did actually really like this movie, and I will probably revisit it because it was funny. They knew that this was completely ridiculous, and they didn't care. You know, if you have such a strange concept, I feel like if you don't lean into it, it's going to ruin it. So keep that in mind, because next is Leprechaun 4 in Space. This one came out in 1996. Its watchability is about a 3 out of 5 shamrocks. I do want to preface this by saying that the first entire half of the movie, I would just skip, because it's just not good. And it doesn't seem to be going anywhere, and you could literally read a synopsis on Wikipedia and then move on. But it's just usually not the best sign when a horror figure goes to space, because it means they ran out of ideas. At this point in my life, I'm just kind of like, don't touch the gold. You don't know where it's been or what curses might be on it. If I found something like that, I'd be like, put it back. Now is not the time for that. There are demon dogs that remind me heavily of The Thing, and they have ripped off Star Wars lightsabers. I cannot make this up. Piss brought him back, literally. So I guess he needs a liquid substance to come back. Like, okay, anyway, there are just really no rules in this franchise. And then it just gets bonkers from there. And that's where it gets fun. They just like leaned right in, just like they did in the third movie. Somehow in this movie, the leprechaun is actually the least interesting part of it. It's like, sir, how did this even happen? And also, yes, we did let this happen because space is where the leprechaun needs to be. They're on a search and destroy mission to Ithacon to kill an alien life form. And the doctor is totally giving me Dr. Evil, but make him German vibes. And also, what are these names? Krylanium? Like, okay. It really just feels like a parody of space movies in general, which is the only way I feel they could make this work. The captive is dressed sort of like Princess Leia. Her name is Princess Zarina. And the leprechaun wants to marry her because then he'll have all the power in the universe as a king. And I have a question. How did he get up there? And why? King Dad is broke, and Zarina shouldn't be interested in the leprechaun at all. As my mom always said, dating is not charity work because money won't fix her waking up to him every day, but somehow she's mildly seduced into the idea after seeing his gold stash. This whole thing, by the way, feels like an episode of Mystery Science Theater with like the doctor transmitting in and the acting. Is this what they're making fun of, or do they not realize that Mystery Science Theater was making fun of them? The first kill is the guy who Leprechaun was reborn from his piss. Then there was a slashing of a containment suit. One dude was smashed into the ground by a heavy-looking cheese grater thing. Someone was dropped. There was a pancake head flattening, an electrocution. Several people don't die. It's more like an episode of American Horror Story over here. They just die for a bit and then come back later. There's some liquid nitrogen, and after that he gets shot. So they Terminator 2'd Mitten Spider. And I'll explain what Mitten Spider is in a minute. We've got so much happening. So Dr. Mittenhand, he wants to be beautiful, obviously, but the whole computer with an organic structure thing didn't go so well because obviously nothing could go wrong there. The doctor is like a baby Cronenberg creation. So Dr. Mittenhand is a mostly machine rolling android with only a human head and a partial torso. He has one arm and then some liquids. But the best joke so far is, if I lose any more troops, your ass is grass. If you even have an ass. Like, you're going to be ridiculous, right? Lean into it. So Dr. Mittenhand at one point turns into this like spider thing and starts calling himself Mitten Spider, because that's what you do apparently in horror. A huge middle finger is all that's left of the Leprechaun, which is funny. And then, like, what happened to the princess? Like, what even is this movie? But it's weirdly enjoyable once it gets going because it's just sheer insanity that feels like a rewrite hell. So now we're going to switch into Leprechaun in the Hood. I gave this one 1.5 out of 5 shamrocks because I love the idea, right? Like, because there is something when you give these supernatural situations to Black people and Latino people where they're just like, fuck this, I gotta go. But unfortunately, this one was not done super well. There were some really funny moments, but they were small moments, and the rest of the movie had very little plot and nothing really moving it forward. Not even insanity. They find the statue of him with the medallion, which feels like the continuation of another one of these, because Leprechaun 4 is clearly in the distant future where we're going to chromium or whatever, and we have death via Fropic because they were electrocuted. None of this feels like a good idea in this movie. Anything anyone does is just not a good idea. We have this group of kids who want to be music stars, so they think it's a good idea to go steal from a gangster who originally stole from a leprechaun, and they call him Chucky on crack, and it's like, you're not wrong, are ya? There's this leprechaun dog whistle that everybody freezes and listens to, and it eventually causes people to pay attention, and fortune calls. It's not a Leprechaun movie if he doesn't impersonate a woman at least once, which of course he does. They're just a lot less focused on kills and being creative because Leprechaun mostly chokes people out, and that's how they die in this one. The plot doesn't feel very much like it's utilizing the Leprechaun. More like he's just kind of there, which is something that continues in almost all the movies. Probably the first 3 were more focused on him, and then 4 just also felt like he was just kind of there while all this other crazy stuff happened. There's also this whole idea of like youth-centered idiocy that's driving the plot forward, because one of the people in there is like, we shouldn't be messing with magic, and the other 2 are like, no, let's mess with magic. That's always a good idea. Also, stealing money is really never a good way to make your dreams come true, because the price of all of this stuff is not worth paying. We have what is called zombie fly girls, and it felt like super lazy writing, because these girls, literally all that was zombie about them was that their eyes glowed unnaturally green. Otherwise, I mean, at least give us dead girls, like, if we're gonna be, like, zombie, you know what I mean? Like, come on, y'all are getting lazy. Women in this movie seem to be more like props, or they're mother figures. There's nothing in between. It's very sexist. And another thing that I've noticed about the 90s in general is that dressing in drag to solve your problems is something that happens a lot. And obviously, a bunch of this is problematic at best and offensive at worst. I was upset when Butch died because he was my favorite character. He at least did his supernatural research. You know, not many people think to do that. This movie had me think I'm concerned a few too many times for me to like it. Hopefully the next one, Back to the Hood, is better, because this one just really lacked a central vision carrying it through, and it didn't lean enough into its own silliness, which really is how these movies work at all. But I liked Leprechaun Back to the Hood primarily. Like, out of the two, this one's definitely stronger. But it's also not amazing towards the end. So it's like a 2.5 out of 5 Shamrocks. What did I give the other one? Yeah, it's like 1.5. So it's definitely better, and it's watchable. But there are some things. Anyway, I feel like in every single one of these movies, we get new lore that is immediately disregarded in the next movie. Now, the Leprechaun is being regarded as like a guardian of the gold from evil men. This one Leprechaun figure decided not to go back home under the ground once the gold was protected. He was gonna keep going. So he's like Leprechaun Satan, essentially. And then this story is just sort of deeply inaccurate about leprechauns in general. They were shoemakers, not anything else. And that bit got dropped much earlier in the series. Like, I think we didn't see it again after Leprechaun 1. But he looks like he's older and he's somehow uglier. Clovers are the only thing that carries through the series as like a real weakness, and it's not used in every movie. He gets buried under a youth center that was supposed to be built. We have, though, in this one, a lot more 3D characterization and less boredom. You kind of forget that this is a Leprechaun movie. But the white people in this movie are just as cringy as you would expect. But first time we see a character be generous with the gold. And that happens in this movie. So Emily ends up finding the gold and she distributes the wealth amongst her friends. But you would hope that this would bypass the rules, but no, we're not in that movie. Then there's this idea of, is it really greed in a marginalized community, or is it just a need for more wealth to flow into there? Know what I mean? Also, why attack the dude who has one bit of your gold instead of the people who have the majority? What, you don't sense the gold anymore? You did it in every other movie. Make it make sense. I heard they had to teach Warwick Davis how to use a bong for this movie, and all of the sequences where the leprechaun is high are just really funny. He like falls over a lot. In this one, there's just a lot of like stabbing with his hand or with other objects that are not sharp, like a bong, or where he rips out someone's mandible. He de-legs a cop and de-hearted a man and slit a throat. There's a lot going on there. My only real issue with this movie is that it feels more like a comedy than a horror movie. Like, yes, these movies are super silly, and the only way they work is if you lean into the silliness, but it's like they're forgetting what genre they're in. And there's nothing wrong with mixing genres as long as you have a clear vision of what you're doing. So that was like the only thing. The gold also used to not be refillable. He'd count every piece until he got it back. So once again, we're just seeing all of these new details where no sense of continuity can be reached, because very little has been carried throughout the series. We also have not seen the leprechaun's blood in a while. It's green slime. It's gross. But it just seems like in these movies it's getting easier to disarm the leprechaun because he's not using his magic very much anymore. A book stops him when he gets whacked with it. Why has nobody just given him the gold back? No harm, no foul. Like, why do they keep sitting here trying to defend this action when this little dude is going to come after you forever? And how many times am I going to have to say it? You cannot fight the supernatural with guns. Come on, guys. It's the supernatural. There's this moment where they're like, oh, let's do clover-infused bullets. Like, it's a pretty good idea. It's just, it didn't work. We can see how these movies devolve into how many sets can we go to? They're literally just set hopping at this point. I get that we're running, but this isn't really helpful to anything that's happening to just have like 5 different sets in a single scene. And the last third of the movie was a little bit of a slog, and that's why it wasn't really a 3 out of 5, because it was boring. You just sort of lost interest in the fight because it just seemed to be going nowhere. But eventually the leprechaun gets trapped in the wet cement, but in a cliffhanger, he digs himself out. But they never moved forward with a sequel. And also, I'm just really not excited that Emily, who seemed like a nice girl, she ended up with Rory. He's not a good person. He's super greedy. And supernatural experiences don't fix the issues that we have inside. Usually they just make them worse. Anyway, thank you for listening to all of my thoughts about the Leprechaun series, which is a total mess, but but it can be a lot of fun. So I'll give them that. But my favorites were Leprechaun 3, and oddly, Leprechaun in Space was funny as hell. I wanted to like 2. 1 is okay, and then 6 is okay. 2 and 5 are weirdly the weakest links in this. So hope you had fun. I hope you guys have a good St. Patrick's Day, and definitely a demon-free and a leprechaun-free day. See you later.